Hello, good afternoon. This is Saba Imru Mathieu from Leaders Today, and I'm really happy to welcome Dana Walden for a short webinar on the topic of empathy. She's an expert in this area, so it's really great to have her over. Dana is an executive coach. She's a professor at university on leadership. She's a business owner. Her company is called Certo. And she's also with Leaders Today and a group of coaches and thought leaders. And we've gathered together around the topics of leadership and coaching. So I'll give her the floor. Maybe you want to introduce yourself or have a first statement. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you, Saba, for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you talking about a topic which I know is near and dear to your heart and my heart as well, this topic of empathy, which is part of emotional intelligence. And it's a topic, as you know, ends up coming up quite often in coaching sessions that we may be leading, but also in conversations around the topic of leadership. So I'm really excited to be able to spend some time with you today on this topic of empathy.
Wonderful then. So perhaps I'd like to start by asking you a definition of empathy, because we don't really know what it is. We kind of have a vague idea, but most people can't really pinpoint a good definition. So what is it in your point of view?
So maybe something simple to work with, as you pointed out, a definition that I would like to offer is empathy is really this ability that we have to sense what others are feeling and what others are thinking. And so this really requires our ability to step into the shoes of the other person. There is the part about understanding, sensing what they're thinking, and we can try and see things through their eyes and maybe relate to something that we've experienced that could be similar. That's the cognitive part of empathy. And then there's the emotional part of empathy, which is feeling what they are feeling. And we may be able to do that more easily if we can relate to an experience that we have had in the past that may be similar and how we felt at that time.
Right. Well, that gives us a bit more clarity onto what the term empathy means. And this is something, it's sort of in the general mood, especially in the business world, of trying to be slightly more empathic. And why do you think there is such a lack of empathy in the business world? Why is it so common?
Why is the lack of empathy so common? I hear you asking, and that's a great question, and I think we could probably come up with a variety of explanations for that. If I look at my own personal experience and also the experience of clients that I work with in the business world, oftentimes what I hear is that we're under pressure to work at a very fast pace. And we're living in these times of unprecedented accelerated change where we feel the constant pressure to keep moving forward, moving ahead, making things happen. So that may cause us not to tune in to others and how they're thinking, what they're feeling. Mm-hmm. It also causes us not to tune into ourselves and what we're thinking and how we're feeling. That may be one reason. Another reason could also be that typically in the Western culture, we've not given a lot of place in the workplace for emotions. They're considered to be soft and fluffy. And we oftentimes pride ourselves on being factual and objective and looking at hard facts. So there may be a little bit of that as well, and the reason why we don't exercise empathy as much as we could in the workplace, at least in the Western culture that I've experienced in the US and Europe.
There are two really interesting points you're making there. Is the one is about being tuned into your own emotions, you mentioned. So that seems to be sort of a requirement to be able to then be tuned into other people's emotions. I thought that was really interesting. And also the fact that you say that, you know, emotions are really not spoken about in the workplace nowadays. So I'd like to ask you, what does empathy have to do with leadership then?
And that's a wonderful question. So what does empathy have to do with leadership? There's a definition of leadership. It's a definition that I particularly appreciate, which talks about the fact that leaders have this responsibility to tap into their own values and aspirations and translate that into a vision that is compelling and that will pull the organization forward into the future. And at the same time, in order to be successful in doing that, they need to be able to tap into the values and aspirations and needs and feelings of their employees, the people with whom they're working. And when they're able to do that, that allows them to engage these people, to mobilize these employees in the accomplishment of this vision, making the vision a reality. And so this requires empathy. So first, we need to understand what our employees, our colleagues are thinking and feeling, what's important to them, what they value, what their dreams are, and how can we harness that and align that with our aspirations for the organization and help people therefore move together towards achieving a common vision.
So what is an empathic person made of? I mean, is it something that you're born with, that you just sort of comes naturally, or what are the elements of an empathic person, or the components?
So an empathic person, I would say we're all born with the potential for empathy, and it's a question of being aware about our potential, understanding what it is and how we can use it, why it would be important, and then continuously working to develop it. So like many of the soft skills that we talk about in leadership and in general inside of organizations, it's never a check the box, I'm done on this one. It's a constant, every day we have the opportunity to work on empathy. And some days we're probably better at it than others. And that's normal, right? Basically, to answer your question, a person who is empathic will tend to be someone who has really an ability for listening attentively to the other person, as you're doing now, and listening more to understand the person and what they're saying, and not so much in order to evaluate or assess what the person is saying. So it's really listening attentively without any judgment to what the person is sharing, and listening with all of your senses. So not just to the words they're saying, but also to their body language, also to their paraverbals. How are they using their voice? And that really is what we would talk about active listening, where we're really actively engaged with all of our senses in our body in listening, giving our attention to the person in front of us.
So if a leader wants to become more empathic or develop their empathic skills, they would be listening more, listening beyond just the words. So there's quite a deliberate intentionality, I might say, to this exercise. How can a leader develop that?
So sometimes it's easier if we practice empathy with people that we are close to, that we care about, like family, for example, or friends, because there we already have a tendency to want to be empathic. The care and concern is already there in the relationship. And that, if we practice a little bit more, as you mentioned, with intentionality, with our family and friends, and we start to build up some skill, we can then bring that into the workplace. And maybe we start first with those who we feel most comfortable with and build up some skill practicing with them. And as we become more and more confident, and as we're able to become more fluent in this soft skill, this emotional intelligence, competency of empathy, we can then spread our horizon, let's say, and reach out to more people even those people with whom maybe in the past we had a hard time feeling empathy, or maybe we even had a hard time being patient enough or understanding enough to let them finish their thought.
Finishing their thought. That's really interesting, because I can hear a lot of people at work interrupting each other, not letting others finish their thought. So yeah, I wonder, if you're interrupting others, how can you actually be understanding what they mean to say? I have another question for you around really, how to apply empathy in a fast-paced office environment, or in period of great stress, when leaders themselves are very stressed and under a lot of pressure, and having to resolve difficult problems. What would help them to get into that empathic position?
So what could be helpful could be to recall what it was like to be on the receiving end of empathy. And for most people, if we take just a minute or two to reflect on those people in our lives, whether it's leaders or colleagues or family members or friends who have demonstrated empathy towards us, we can pretty quickly recall how that felt. And oftentimes people tell me there's a range of positive emotions. They may have felt cared for.
Mm-hmm.
They may have felt respected, valued, a whole host. They may have felt kindness, that they were receiving kindness from the other, encouragement. And so all of these positive emotions are things that we all value and appreciate when we're on the receiving end. And then we may also recall, how did the person actually go about doing that? How did they make us feel that we were being listened to, that we were respected, that we were valued, that we were on the receiving end of some generosity in terms of making time and space available? And oftentimes when I ask those questions, people tell me, well, interesting. The person nodded their head. The person let me finish my thoughts, gave me time and space. The person kept eye contact, whatever's appropriate, obviously. Different cultures have different norms in terms of eye contact. And, at the end, the person said, I'm here for you. Or thank you for sharing. Or maybe they asked me a question. If I understood you correctly, would that be a fair statement? And I really felt understood. So, in the end of the day, there are some key ingredients to demonstrating empathy, and it's fairly straightforward.
Yes. I'd like you perhaps to develop, if you would, on how empathy might help in a situation where a group of people have to solve a problem together. What are the advantages for all the members of a group, for example, to have this kind of empathic attitude in solving a problem?
So when there is empathy, there is an opportunity for people to express ideas and opinions which may be different, which may be divergent. And in a team environment, what studies have shown, maybe not specifically studies on empathy, but studies on how teams work, they've found that those teams who have the greater diversity of thought are the teams that may take a little bit longer to get to a result. However, when they do achieve a result, it's typically much better than teams where there was a lack of diversity of thought. So the diversity of thought can make things a little bit longer, a little bit more complicated. However, it makes the exchange much richer, and therefore the output, the result of that exchange, is typically of a higher quality. And so empathy can facilitate this. If I'm willing to give you the space and listen wholeheartedly and with all of my body, mind, and soul to what you're saying, then something might emerge from what you're talking about that I would never have imagined before. It may be completely opposite to what I had imagined, and it may nourish my thinking It may nourish the thinking of others, and that may lead us even to a different idea that no one would have thought before otherwise.
It sounds like empathy is not only something that is valuable between humans, you know, from human to human, and recognizing other people and respecting them and listening to them for their input, but that it also has an impact on better quality thinking and more innovative thinking, and perhaps maybe it also has ultimately a positive impact on business results. Is there anything in your experience or in your studies that points in that direction?
So yes, indeed. Very interesting article written by a professor at Wharton in the business school there, spoke about, and you have to forgive me, I don't remember all the details, but he was particularly looking at the emotional culture inside of organizations. And the findings pointed to the fact that in organizations that recognize that there is not only a cognitive culture, but there is also an emotional culture. And in those organizations which are recognizing the emotions of employees and giving space for expression of emotion, whether it be the more positive or the more pleasant or the less pleasant emotions, actually, they have both hard outcomes and soft outcomes. So some of the hard outcomes they found was a decrease in absenteeism at work and an increase in financial performance of those organizations. And some of the softer outcomes were positive shifts in terms of employee attitudes and also in employee satisfaction at work. And although that particular article that I read didn't speak about it, there's also, one can imagine, a carryover effect. When you have employees who are feeling positive and cared for in their workplace, understood, listened to, respected, and that generates a certain amount of positive emotions. Well, when they interact with your customers, they're going to be carrying forward that energy that's created from those positive emotions. And that can create a positive carryover towards the clients. And so this is really beneficial in the sense that anything positive you're able to create in your culture is going to carry forward to your customers, to your suppliers, to your other stakeholders. And this is a win-win-win in sorts for both employees, the organizations, and all those people with whom you come into contact.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really something. I think it is such a strong humanizing factor, and nowadays we're really going through a transition about the around the nature of organizations and how should companies function, and how can people contribute better as people and be recognized as people and human beings in companies. And it seems that empathy, with all the skills or sub-skills that are involved in exhibiting it and expressing it, is really a direct line to having more humane organizations. What I'd like to ask you also is, you know, we talk a lot about leaders and how leaders have to do this and leaders have to do that, because of course they, you know, they're giving the example, and a lot of organizations are still very hierarchical. So the leader has even not only an informal but a formal role to play. But I'd like to know, in your point of view, I mean, who else needs to develop empathy in an organization? Is it only the boss?
No, absolutely not. And thank goodness, right? So empathy, empathy works top down, bottom up. It works laterally, it works internally, it works externally. We all have room for opportunity here. And that's the wonderful thing about this competency. And although we talk about leadership, and obviously leaders have a very important role to play in terms of setting the emotional tone of the culture of the organization and keeping the pulse of the organization, keeping their finger on the pulse. Obviously, they have a responsibility for that, but so does everybody else in the organization, particularly given that in the Western culture that we're living and working in primarily today, you and I, we are more and more wanting to be involved in creating the culture of the organization that we are a part of. So employees at every level have an opportunity to make a contribution, and employees at every level have an opportunity to exercise and flex their empathy skills. So absolutely, everyone should be involved, and there's a feel-good factor to it as well. So it's one of those skills that people tend to enjoy practicing, and as they become more skilled at it and they find more and more opportunities to do so, they come back to me oftentimes and say, yeah, this is something that I really enjoy doing. I'm really glad I'm doing more of it now. I'm really, really enjoying it. So it's very rewarding for both parties.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear that people are enjoying developing their empathy skills. What would you, if you've have experience and you've taught empathy and trained people in developing their emotional intelligence in general and empathy specifically, what would you say of an organization that you may have visited where there's kind of a culture, an organizational culture where empathy is widely spread and practiced almost, I wouldn't say by everybody, but by a great majority of the people? What kind of an organizational culture, what kind of a feel is there? What kind of a vibe do you feel there?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. You know, some cultures you go into and they feel very predominantly results oriented, and I've definitely worked in cultures like that. I have a strong appreciation for achievement orientation, which is another emotional intelligence competency. And at the same time, you can have both. You can have results orientation, and you can have a people first spirit inside of your organization. And so those who do a really great job at balancing the need to achieve and balancing this people first and taking care of people are the ones from my experience firsthand, and also observations of other cultures, that tend to get it right, so to speak. And so in these organizations, yes, they do have goals and objectives that they're working to achieve. They have missions and visions. And at the same time, they realize that they're going to get here by working with people. Everything gets done with, by, and through people. And so how we take care of people is going to make all the difference in the world in terms of how we're able to take care of our customers and how we're able to achieve our mission and vision. And so these organizations are going to do things like allow time for employees to express themselves. And that can be, you know, one of the best organizations that I worked with. We had these sound bites of feedback where we would have one-on-ones each week with the different people on our team, including our hierarchy. And it's just an opportunity to hit the pause button, step over to the side, and have an informal conversation. And typically we didn't start by talking about the agenda. We started by talking about things like, how are you today? Not how are you doing, what are you doing, but how are you, how are you feeling? What's happening for you right now? And this is a way to send the signal that we care. And when we're able to start a meeting in that way, it's a very short meeting in that way, we're already exercising our empathy. And that helps us to build trust and helps us to build relationships, which are really key to being successful as an organization, since again, everything gets done with, by, and through others. And so I think those organizations that really do it right, they carve out dedicated time for listening to others, hearing what others have to share, beyond the work, beyond the content that's specific to the organization, and really tune into the personal level.
Wow, it sounds like these organizations are really making a big effort to meet people's needs, because people do need to feel recognized. I know that's one of the biggest complaints I hear from either coaching clients or people in our workshop, is that, no, I feel just like a number, or I feel just like a cog, in a wheel, and not having their individuality recognized. And I think it's really wonderful that by introducing empathy into companies, you're allowing them to develop this strategy of meeting the employees' needs as human beings. And then, of course, they will perform much better because companies are performance oriented, as you said. This is really interesting, Dana. It's a really deep plunge into what empathy is and how it can play out in organizations. And it's nice to hear it from somebody who's actually doing it and who actually sees the positive results on the terrain. You're in the field, inside companies, and coaching leaders and managers to develop these skills. Just to sort of conclude our conversation here, what would you recommend as a first step to our listeners, the ones that are watching this short webinar? What is a first step they can do to improve their empathy skills at whatever level they may be already? Some may be very advanced, some may be just beginning to become aware. What is step one to start today?
Step one to start today? Excellent question. I would recommend practicing tuning into yourself, listening to what's happening inside of you, how you're feeling, what you're thinking, the sensations in your body, giving some quality time to that. And then I'm going to add a second part to step one, would be from there, start working on tuning in to others. And that may mean simple things like turn off the cell phone, put down I know you and I are interfacing via a laptop right now, but it may mean put down the screens, turn off the cell phone for just 1 minute, 2 minutes, and give all of your time and attention to the person in front of you. They will appreciate that so much. And this will be the positive encouragement to continue on with this practice, because what I've heard is that people who have taken the time to implement these small, what seem to be small steps, have been rewarded back with empathy coming from the person that they are actually practicing empathy with. So I've heard success stories of relationships being mended in the workplace because one person decided to practice his or her empathy with another colleague, and it turned out to be a mutual effort in the end, and created or moved those relationships to a completely different level. So I'm quite optimistic in terms of what these small steps can do, and I would say give it a try.
Well, very good. I think really you've wrapped it up with a very practical thing that we can all start doing, starting from today, and hopefully have quick results that we can rejoice about in terms of empathy and better connection with others. So is there anything else you would like to say?
Anything else I would like to say is it really contributes to a positive work climate. And I think so many of us want to work in a positive work climate. And if that's important to the people who are listening, and I'm willing to bet that it is, then empathy has been found to be one of the key contributors to creating a workplace where people can bring their best selves to work and thrive. And that's so much more pleasant for everyone when we can come to work and thrive versus come to work and merely survive.
Thank you so much, Dana, for this really interesting conversation and wealth of knowledge and heart that you brought to our conversation. I really want to thank you for that, and I look forward to other webinars that we might do together. So I'd like to also thank the people who've been watching us. I'm sure you learned a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. At Leaders Today, we love basing all our work, our workshops, our conversation on research and evidence. We're very, very interested in what is happening out there in terms of new developments and new knowledge around leadership and coaching. So stay tuned and check our YouTube channel or our blog or our website. And if you want to put a comment, if you like this webinar, or if you have any questions, put a comment in the boxes underneath the video, and we'll be answering you, of course, and you'll also find the link to our website. And what else? Yeah, join our newsletter. I guess I've done all the communications part. Thank you very much, and see you at the next webinar. Thank you, Dana. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.